Hello again. The Millennia stories of Brian Aldiss. An Hegelian perspective making the implicit explicit. Right, this is the megalopolis Millennia. A story originally called Secret of a Mighty City, which is Unisphar. It's on Unisphar, which is Earth, comprised of one massive city, Nunian. Rhapsody, that's the name of the character, we'll get to that in a minute, who works for a movie studio, has come across reels of footage of a documentary of the city and its true nature made by Ars Staker. Rhapsody claims there is enough material to make a film for the masses. The studio concurs, but the true nature of the city, evident in Ars's original footage, is lost in all the glitter and glamour and is thereby totally transformed. Hence, what we get is an idealized vision of a city which by no manner exists. The work of visionary filmmaker anthropologist Staker, who exposes the seamy underside of a sprawling megacity, becomes the subject of a new show 20 years later, with all the segments charged with meaning edited out. Now, there's a quote here from another work of Aldiss's. It'll become obvious what the relevance is, that he's discussing Plato here. Plato would have no actors in his Republic, in case pretense devoured what was real. Plato's fears have proved well-grounded. Actors, despised, almost outcast until last century, have become something more than respectable. They, together with all those imitation actors, pop stars, TV celebrities, people who are famous for being famous, now receive adulation. They are the millionaires, the courtesans of our system. Solzhenitsyn, it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which you might remember, escaping to a West he had once admired, snarled at the meretricious falsity of what he found. We have built illusions around us and see no way out of the glass forest. Now, for Hegel, there is not such a sharp distinction between true and false in philosophy. Rather, this will all come together eventually, by the way. Rather, there are kinds of partial disclosures of the truth. Philosophy has a history, namely the history of moving through partial disclosures of the truth towards a progressively fuller conception of the truth. So from the phenomenology of spirit, the very attempt to define how a philosophical work is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject matter, drags in an extraneous concern, and what is really important for the cognition of the truth is obscured. The more conventional opinion gets fixated on the antithesis of truth and falsity, the more it tends to expect a given philosophical system to be either accepted or contradicted, and hence it finds only acceptance or rejection. It does not comprehend the diversity of philosophical systems as the progressive unfolding of truth, but rather sees in it simple disagreements. But he who rejects philosophical systems, the new philosopher, does not usually comprehend what he is doing in this way, and he who grasps the contradiction between them, that is, the historian of philosophy, does not, as a general rule, know how to free it from its one-sidedness, or maintain it in its freedom by recognizing the reciprocally necessary moments that take shape as a conflict and seeming incompatibility. So, if we look back at Plato or Aristotle, it is not such a matter of who is right and who is wrong. Rather, they are both right about part of the truth that they are disclosing. It was necessary that the relative truth gets disclosed, but in the end, it is absolute truth that gets disclosed. What is implicit in being all along becomes explicit. The true structure of being can become fully explicit to itself in and through human understanding. History is not all that happens. Perhaps I should say that's not what history is, just one thing after another. One damn thing after another, as somebody once said. History is the work of reason. History may well be a slaughter bench. That's a phrase taken from Hegel's philosophy of history, by which he doesn't mean it's non-stop violence and murder, that sort of thing. He means individuals, you and me. We just come and go like we were never here. History may well be a slaughter bench involving all manner of contingencies. That's us. We're contingent beings in a sense. But ultimately, it leads to a deepening understanding of what freedom is. As he says in his lectures on the philosophy of history, the history of the world is the discipline of the uncontrolled natural will, bringing it into obedience to a universal principle and conferring subjective freedom. The East knew, and to the present day knows, only the one is free, only that the one is free. The Greek and Roman world, that some are free. The German world knows that all are free. The first political form, therefore, which we observe in history is despotism, the second democracy and aristocracy, and the third monarchy. So the Millennia stories cover some 40 million years of future history. So how well is reason doing it given all that time? So all this gives an account of where they're at with their dual theory. So not very far, obviously. The first galactic religion, generally accepted by enlightened men throughout the galaxy, claims that the universe was created by two similar but opposed forces, Toe and Plato. It's obvious who Plato refers to. Toe could be Aristotle, I don't know. Toe created non-sentient matter. Plato, coming later, created sentient matter. The two forces are hostile to, or at best indifferent to each other. Plato is by far the less powerful, for sentient matter must always depend to some extent upon non-sentient. The objectives of the two forces are as opposed as their natures. As far as humanity can comprehend Toe at all, his objectives may be described in the word endurance. He must endure through the matter he has created, perpetuating himself as it is perpetuated, and its perpetuation is only challenged by Plato. The sentient forces of Plato are infinitely weaker than his opponents. For one thing, the very nature of sentience is transient. For sentience entails development, which in its turn entails decay. Sentient objects, moreover, are easily overcome by non-sentient ones. Floods, earthquakes, nova are not only overcome but totally destroyed. And in that destruction, converted into non-sentient objects, Plato has only one effective defense against the vast opposed ranks of nullity. The total material in the universe is finite and eventually exhaustible. The forces of Toe cannot therefore increase. But the forces of Plato can, for life and sentience are created out of the non-sentient, thus increasing themselves and decreasing the enemy. Humanity is one of Plato's finest instruments, for through him or her, sentience is spread from planet to planet, banishing nullity. Right. Lectures on the history of philosophy. What Hegel says about Plato and Aristotle, to distinguish them. What is peculiar in the philosophy of Plato is its application to the intellectual and supersensuous world, and its elevation of consciousness into the realm of spirit. Thus the spiritual element, which belongs to thought, obtains in this form an importance for consciousness, and is brought into consciousness just as, on the other hand, consciousness obtains a foothold on the soil of the other. The Christian religion has certainly adapted the lofty principle that man's inner and spiritual nature is his true nature. That will prove important in what's coming. Aristotle also seems to have philosophized only respecting the individual and particular, and not to have risen from it to the thought of the absolute and universal, to the thought of God. He always goes from the individual to the individual. His task concerns what is, and is just as clearly divided off as a professor has his work divided into a half-year's course. And though in this course he examines the whole of the world of conception, he yet appears only to have recognized the truth in the particular, or only a succession of particular truths. This has nothing dazzling about it, for he does not appear to have risen to the idea, as Plato speaks of the nobility of the idea, nor to have led back to the individual. But if Aristotle, on the one hand, did not logically abstract the universal idea, for then his so-called logic, which is something very different, would have had as its principle the recognition of one notion in all. On the other hand, there appears in Aristotle the one absolute, the idea of God, as itself a particular, in its place beside the other. Although it is all truth, it is as if we said, there are plants, animals, men, and also God, are the most excellent of all. The absolute idea. In Hegel's system, everything is logically deduced, and the science of logic begins with being and ends with the absolute idea. The order is not arbitrary and can be justified, albeit the question arises as to why the beginning is not rather the absolute idea, and with the end being being. For the purpose of avoiding the mystery of an undeduced beginning, both procedures are necessary, for if we begin with being, but are unable to reverse the process, the absolute idea would be an undeduced beginning. If we began with the absolute idea, and advanced to being, but were unable to reverse the process, then the absolute idea would be an undeduced beginning. The answer lies in demonstrating that being is not an undeduced beginning, since its foundation is the absolute idea, and the absolute idea is not an undeduced beginning, since its foundation is being, and hence both orders of deduction are necessary. Beginning with being, and proceeding in that order, while mentioning nothing of the reverse process, is explained by all deduction of value proceeding from the implicit to the explicit. This is where we're going. As in a syllogism, the conclusion is implicit in the premises. The purpose of the deduction is to make explicit that which is implicit. The explicit is the same as the manifest and evidently obvious, and it is merely since the conclusion is not explicit, which is to say not evidently obvious, that a deduction is needed to make it so. In the same manner, becoming and all subsequent categories up to the absolute idea are implicit in being, but they are not explicit. Hence, in order to make them explicit, we start with being and produce them out of it. The reverse procedure is not needed, since it is evidently obvious, explicit, that the latter categories contain the earlier. It is not evident how being involves such categories as substance or cause, and so a deduction from being to substance, cause, and so on is needed, and it is evidently obvious that cause involves being, and so it would be fruitless to proceed with the deduction in that order. The nature of reason, regarded as the absolute, if the absolute first from which the world flows is reason, an issue arises with regard to whether the reason itself is an unexplained fact. Reason is a self-explanatory principle. It is a self-determined reason. Reason is its own reason. Reason is the system of categories and a self-enclosed and self-determined sphere. The final category has for its reason being, and being has for its reason the final category. The whole system of categories returns into itself and is deduced from itself. That is to say, reason is its own reason and is self-determined, and since no prior reason can be forthcoming for it, no reason external to itself, it is therefore suited to be the absolute first, the principle of explanation of the entire universe. So back to the megalopolis Millennia. The dual theory was first galactic religion. From its inception on the hub world of Lolth, it stood as, I don't know how to give it that name, it stood as cool and aloof from men as a tall mountain and as distant from their affairs as a Plutonian hill. It recognized life and the finish of life. It recognized the chill of the night and the length of its ultimate duration. It recognized the shortness of day and its beauty. It knew that beyond all joy lay a curtain of something too cruel to be called sorrow, too noble to be called misery, that all flesh was air, breathed and finished in a minute, but that in that minute, all that time for doing, lay in the truth that was. It was a galactic religion, hard to grasp and uncomforting when grasped, for which very reason the true adults of those days turned to it. It offered them no afterglow beyond the grave, nor did it speak of golden voices from other spheres. It bestowed no rewards for virtue or punishment or for weakness. It had no altars. Yes, it had no altars. No one, it's not very good. No one decked in shrines with flowers. No one set its tenets to a trumpeting music. Yet their hearts took on strength and depth from its sober truth. The believers were accordingly not afraid to demonstrate that the dual theory set little store by man and his glories. Man was an incidental in Plato's path to full sentience. The prime sentient unit was the cell. Now that had learned to be itself by itself, it was forsaken that grouping called man, to which it had so long adhered. Just as man had long since abandoned the tribe structure necessary to his primitive days. Therefore believers had no right to, oppose a step which, according to their faith, furthered the aims of Plato. Right. Reducing to a cell. The prime sentient unit was the cell. I was thinking of making something about Russell's logical atomism here, but no need to complicate matters. The aerostomas represented a compromise between Toe and Plato. They were semi-sentient flying things made of pyrocasus 12, a malleable material susceptible to human thought impulses. A little more than airborne stomachs, the aerostomas flew low over land and sea on every planet threatened with cellular disintegration. Swallowing the vagabond cells, compressing and stifling them, of non-cellular origin, the aerostomas were immune to disintegration. A new princely order arose on Yenisvar. The triumphing men who went forth like knights to battle with the invisible foe, aerostomas perching on their shoulders or circling restlessly in the air above. The aerostomas, incidentally, represent what I was saying earlier about reconciling two conflicting ideas. In this case, Toe and Plato. It's not a matter of seeing them both as wrong, but rather sort of reconciling the contradictions. Yenisvar, under the Galingura, that's the language they used, under the Galingura regime, for a far shorter period than most of its sister planets, had sole spaceships still in commission. With these, it was able to take a lead, that's the typo there, it was able to take a lead in galactic trade. The spirit of its people, hardened under the regime of the triumphing men, rendered it fit to compete with the most mercenary of rivals. Its banks swelled like overfed bellies, its merchants walked in golden slippers, the city of Nunion sprawled and lost its shape like a gorged python. Mammon was back on his throne, and the following fragment reflects only a tiny portion of his face. That's an important section in what I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to be coming on to, believe it or not, I know it may sound like I'm going all over the place at the moment, Karl Marx and capitalism. Speaking of which, I mean connecting, I tend to this is tended to be my motto, only connect E.M. Forster. So the secret of the city brought to mind Psalm 31 and the religious connotations that will become evident as well soon in reference to Karl Marx, believe it or not. Oh, how great is thy goodness, which thou hast laid up for them that fear thee, which thou hast wrought for them that trust in thee before the sons of men. Thou shalt hide them in the secret of thy presence. Secret, that's the important concept. The secret of thy presence from the pride of man. Thou shalt keep them secretly in a pavilion from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he hath showed me his marvellous kindness in a strong city. For I said in my haste, I am cut off from before thine eyes. Nevertheless, thou heardest the voice of my supplications when I cried unto thee. O love the Lord, all ye his saints, for the Lord preserveth the faithful, and plentifully rewardeth the proud doer. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart, all ye that hope in the Lord. Back to R. Staker. He had been an individualist. Somehow, his united name of Bastion 44 had never fitted. Now, there's a method of naming in Nunion City, which presents a unified front to confuse outsiders, and it aided insiders in placing you financially. For districts in Nunion were islands divided according to grandeur, you had to be a credit king to live on cello, whereas on pelt and trickle, no one but a deadbeats were permitted to live. Now, this particular method of naming has consequences, which was actually takes us to John Stuart Mill, if I can bring in yet another philosopher, in a system of logic about naming. This leads us to the consideration of a third great division of names into connotative and non-connotative, the latter sometimes but improperly called absolute. This is one of the most important distinctions which we shall have occasion to point out, and one of those which go deepest into the nature of language. A connotative term is one which signifies a subject only or an attribute only. A connotative term is one which denotes a subject and implies an attribute. By a subject is here meant anything which possesses attributes. Thus, John or London or England are names which signify a subject only. Whiteness, length, virtue signify an attribute only. None of these names, therefore, are connotative, but white, long, virtuous are connotative. The word white denotes all white things, as snow proper, the foam of the sea, etc., and implies on the language of the schoolmen connotes the attribute whiteness. The word white is not predicated of the attribute, but of the subject, snow, etc. But what we predicate is of them, we convey the meaning that the attribute whiteness belongs to them. The same may be said of the other words above cited. Virtuous, for example, is the name of a class, which includes Socrates, Howard, the man of Ross, and an indefinable number of individuals, past, present, and to come. These individuals, collectively and severally, can alone be said with propriety to be denoted by the word. Denoted by the word. Of them alone can it properly be said to be a name, but it is a name applied to all of them in consequence of an attribute. which they are supposed to possess in common. The attribute which has received the name of virtue, it is applied to all beings that are considered to possess this attribute, and to none which are not so considered. So, in Union City, and note the connotations of that name, people are given a name that is connotative rather than non-connotative, a proper name, as proper names are. There may be exceptions to this. I mean, does the name Judas have connotations? So anyway, this is a city that is hiding a secret. Philosophy of mind, Hegel again. This is what he says about names. We retain the meaning of names. We acquire the capacity, in the case of linguistic science, of recollecting the representations of objectively linked with them. Then, when we hear or see a word belonging to a foreign language, its meaning presents itself to us, but it does not follow that the converse is true, that we can yet come up with the corresponding word signs for our representations in that language. We learn to speak and write a language later than we understand it. The name is thus the thing, as the thing is available and carries weight in the realm of representation. Reproductive memory has and recognizes the thing in the name, and with the thing it has the name, without intuition and image. The name, as existence of the content within the intelligence, is the externality of intelligence itself, within itself, and the recollection of the name, as the intuition produced by intelligence, is at the same time the self-externalization in which the intelligence posits itself inside itself. The association of the particular names lies in the meaning of the determinations of the sensing, representing or thinking intelligence. The intelligence traverses a series of these determinations within itself as it senses, etc. And he added this remark: given the name lion, we need neither need the intuition of such an animal, nor even its image. The name, when you understand it, is the simple, imageless representation. It is in names that we think. The movie maker Ars Staker, ideas are embedded in solids, as he presents his representation of the city. This, Rhapsody pronounced, is the fabulous city. Rhapsody is the person who discovered Ars Staker's footage and is showing it. 1. Our fabulous city, the city of Nunnion. Nunnion gelled by Unit 2 under Staker at the height of his powers 20 years ago. The solid was to be his greatest work. It was never completed for reasons I will tell you later, but the 16 reels of unedited cathode gel he left behind as his greatest memorial have laid in our vaults all that time. I dug them out the other day. Now I brought in the platonic solids here, because I'm doing my connecting business again. But this is how Plato saw the ultimate underlying reality in terms of solids, as he mentions in the dialogue Timaeus. He associates each of the 4 classical elements, earth, air, water, and fire, with a regular solid. Earth was associated with the cube, air with the octahedron, water with the icosahedron, fire with the tetrahedron. Of the 5th platonic solid, the dodecahedron, he obscurely remarked that the god used it for arranging the constellations on the whole heaven. There was yet a 5th combination, which God used in his delineation of the universe. This is what Hegel identifies as Vorstellung, representation, picture thinking, to understand or to represent reality. There was yet a 5th combination which God used in the delineation of the universe, yes. Now Aristotle added the 5th element, ether, and postulated that the heavens were made of this element, but he was not concerned to match it with Plato's 5th. So back to the story. As the city and its people is presented, Aldiss characterizes humanity as he does elsewhere in his work. Thus, those who are designated human appear to be deficient in
humanity in some basic way, lacking individuality or empathy or creativity, maybe even initiative or adaptability or unpredictability. Or they desire power above all, or they have that collective amnesia that can greatly bless or greatly curse humanity. In his movie, Arzu Marx, all men and women have hearts, even the cruel ones. The good in them gradually gets overlaid and lost. You start good, you end bad, just because you forget. I suppose you forget you're human. The movie maker, made it quite clear that his thronging multitude were harmless, living in flocks. They had developed the flock mentality. All they asked was a nice time. So what is lacking, and we will get to this in theories that I'm going to look at later. Wait till we get to Karl Marx in particular. What is missing is a deep dive into human nature, such as we find in Hegel. Initially, the feeling individuality is indeed a monadic individual. That's monadic. That's the curse of knowledge, you know. I tend to assume people will know what these terms mean, but anyway, that's from monad has a long history. A self-enclosed unit, basically. Individuality is indeed a monadic individual, but being immediate, it is not yet itself, not a subject reflected into itself, and therefore passive. Hence, its selfish individuality is a subject different from a subject that may even be another individual. In relation to this subject, it takes the form of a substance, which is only a dependent predicate. The subject's selfishness sets its vibration and determines it without the least resistance. The subject may be called its genius. The being of feeling is thus intrinsically a completely determinate soul. The totality of the individual in this compressed form is distinct from the existing unfolding of its consciousness. Its view of the world developed interest, inclinations, etc. In contrast to this mediated asunderedness, this intensive form of individuality has been called the genius, which has the final determination in the show of mediations, intentions, reasons, in which the developed consciousness indulges. The concentrated individuality also makes an appearance in the form of what is called the heart or breast. A man is said to be heartless when he thinks and acts with sober consciousness in accordance with his determined purpose, whether they be great substantial aims or petty and unjust interests. A good-hearted man means rather one who gives free rein to the individuality of his feeling, even if it is restricted in scope, and throws himself with his whole individuality into its particularities and is completely fulfilled by them. But of such a good nature, it may be said that it is not so much the genius itself as the policy of indulgere genio. The being of feeling, Gewusstsein, is the genius, which has the final determination, the last word, in the show of mediations, etc. The overall course of our life is determined by our Gewusstleben. Reason provides a justification for what we do and works out the details, yet the justifications are rarely conclusive, and feeling has a deciding say on the matter. This is connected with heart or breast. Breast translates Gemut, which denotes the seat of certain types of feelings, particularly those which embraces the world and its objects with warmth and affection. English is missing an equivalent term and has recourse to approximations such as soul, heart, disposition. It is normally translated as heart, but Hegel, in the passage I quoted, explicitly mentions the heart. Everyone has a Gemut, but not everyone indulges it to the same extent. Therefore, people are heartless, deficient in Gemut, when they pursue their own ends with cold rationality. They are good-hearted, gemütlich, if they put their heart and soul into what they do. The good nature, Gemütlichkeit, is not itself the genius, but indulgence of it, because even heartless have a genius. The Latin phrase indulgere genio occurs in the comic dramatist Plautus in the sense of to indulge one's spirit of enjoyment, to enjoy oneself, to let one's hair down. Philip Sidney refers to it in his defense of poetry.
Where the philosophers, as they scorn to delight, so must they be content little to move, saving wrangling whether virtue be the chief or the only good, whether the contemplative or the active life do excel, which Plato and Berthoud well knew, and therefore made mistress philosophy very often borrow the masking raiment of poesy, for even those hard-hearted evil men who think virtue a school name, and no other good but indulgere genero, and therefore despise the austere admonitions of the philosopher, and feel not the inward reason they stand upon, yet will be content to be delighted, which is all the good fellow poet seems to promise, and so steal to see the form of goodness, which seen they cannot but love, ere themselves be aware, as if they took a medicine of cherries. What we need is poetic philosophy or philosophical poetry. What is the secret of the city? Well, I'm bringing in another philosopher now. But like I said, this will all come together. Jacques Derrida, Spectres of Marx. Let us situate ourselves for a moment in that place where the values of value between use value and exchange value, that will be explained in a minute, secret, mystique, enigma, fetish, and the ideological form a chain in Marx's text, singly the capital, and let us try at least to indicate, it will be only an indicator, the spectral movement of this chain. The movement is staged there where it is a question, precisely of forming the concept of what any stage withdraws from our blind eyes at the moment we open them. Now, this concept is indeed constructed with reference to a certain haunting. It is a great moment at the beginning of Capital, as everyone recalls. Marx is wondering, in effect, how to describe the sudden looming up of the mystical character of the commodity, the mystification of the thing itself, and the money form of which the commodity simple form is the germ. He wants to analyze the equivalent, whose enigma and mystical character only strike the bourgeois economist, in the finished form of money, gold or silver. It is the moment in which Marx means to demonstrate that the mystical character owes nothing to a use value. It is just chance that he illustrates the principle of his explanation by causing a table to turn, or rather by recalling the apparition of a turning table. This table is familiar, too familiar. It is found in the opening of the chapter on the fetishism of the commodity and its secret, Geheimnis. This table has been worn down, exploited, overexploited, or else set aside, no longer in use, in antique shops or auction rooms. The thing is at once set aside and beside itself. Beside itself, because, as we will soon be surprised to see, the said table is a little mad, weird, unsettled, out of joint. One no longer knows, beneath the hermeneutic patina, what this piece of wood, whose example suddenly looms up, is good for and what it is worth, with that which is going to loom up being the mere example. Yet the example of a thing, the table, that seems to loom up of itself, and to stand all at once on its paws, it is the example of an apparition. So what does all that mean? Well, Karl Marx and the mystery of the commodity. Commodities differ in great respects. A concert ticket, tin of beans, lingerie, I don't know why I thought of that. Books, supply your own list, yes. But they do have something in common, for Marx, despite their difference. He discovers a concept, a definition of a kind to unite them all. To begin with, they all have a use to someone, they all have their use value, and furthermore, they have a price or an exchange value. Neither of which are in the commodity. We cannot discover them merely by examining the commodity. They do not inhere in the commodity. So from whence do they come? And this is from where their price derives. But from whence does the price derive? For the useful of the commodity. But we all find different things useful. As he says in Des Capital, not an atom of matter enters into the objectivity of commodities as values. In this it is In this, it is the direct opposite of the coarsely spontaneous objectivity of commodities as physical objects. We may twist and turn a single commodity as we wish, it remains impossible to grasp it as a thing possessing value. What is this mysterious exchange value based upon? What all commodities have in common is that they are products of labour. If we then disregard the use value of commodities, only one property remains, that of being products of labour. We are altogether reduced to the same kind of labour, all are reduced to the same kind of labour, human labour in the abstract. They are merely congealed quantities of homogeneous human labour, expended without regard to the form of its expenditure, as crystals of this solid substance, of this social substance, which is common to them all. They are values, commodity values. By homogeneous, this is what it means by value. A homogeneous unit that unites the heterogeneity of the commodities. Commodities have values only insofar as they are expressions of an identical social substance, human labour. The object has a phantom-like objectivity, as he puts it, or the objectification of a process are taken for the process itself. Phantom objectivity, so these are typical Marx concepts. The relation between people takes on the character of a thing, acquiring an autonomy that conceals its fundamental nature. Commodity fetishism. People overlook the illusion that structures their reality and instead behave as if they don't know how things really are. Labour theory of value. The value of a commodity is determined by the labour that went into its production rather than its price on the market. So here we have a famous passage from Marx, which was in the afterword to the second edition of Das Kapital. The mystifying side of Hegelian dialectic I criticised nearly 30 years ago, at the time when it was still in the fashion. But just as I was working at the first volume of Das Kapital, it was the good pleasure of the peevish, arrogant, mediocre epigoroi, that's the followers of some great master, who are inferior to the master himself. So Marx is talking about himself, his followers, who now talked large in cultured Germany to treat Hegel in the same way as the brave Moses Mendelssohn in Lessing's time treated Spinoza, as a dead dog. I therefore openly avowed myself the pupil of that mighty thinker, and he, even here and there in the chapter on the theory of value, coquetted with the modes of expression peculiar to him. The mystification which dialectic suffers in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general form of working in a comprehensive and conscious manner. With him it is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again, if you would discover the rational kernel within its mystical shell. Now this is where Marx goes wrong, you see, because he is talking in Hegelian terms, sort of bringing in mysticism, but in a sort of ironic sense, you could say. But anyway, this is where it goes wrong, as I will point out. Turning the dialectic the right way up. This is sometimes expressed as standing Hegel on his head, but that isn't quite what Marx said. But either way, Marx is presenting an inversion of Hegel, all right. The true structure of reality is hidden from us, but at least Marx could see through the illusion. Commodities appearing on the shelves as though by magic, generating a fetishistic attitude whereby commodities are endowed with value, as though it belongs to them. By nature, rather than because of the specific modality of their production, commodities and money are encoded and need decoding to be understood. The veil torn asunder. I threw that expression in myself there because only connect. I'm connecting again. It brings to mind Luke. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until that 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Now what the centurion saw, what was done, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly, this was a righteous man," which no doubt is how Marx is wanting to be received, having pulled back the vein of illusion for us. There was forever something real, or material, or physical, sensuous. Remember the opposition between Toe and Plato. Yeah. Something understandable behind them. And so the Marxian inversion, Marx is making implicit what was already explicit. What mystery? What secret? While Hegel is making explicit what is implicit. As Marx said in the Communist Manifesto, the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relation of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbances of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguished the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. Very poetic. Let us return to the solid screen showing of London City. What is the secret of the city? For a secret to be secret proper, does it not have to retain the enigmatic, the unexplained? And this is what we find. Staker's camera is seen to hunt down in the humanity in the concourse of Nunnian City. In sundry doorways, the last watchers of the scene, the ones who had stood motionless, not participating when the evening was at its height, watching the crowd, they waited in doorways as if peering from warrens. From the shadows, their faces gleamed with a terrible, inexpressible tension. Only their eyes moved. These were the men to fascinate Staker. They were his discovery. He believed that if anyone could lead him to the heart of the city, these people could. These subterraneans in doorways. They were there night after night. Staker called them the impotent spectres of the feast. Spectre, right? Note that word. Because Derrida was talking about spectres of Marx, which are not really. They're not spectres. There's nothing mysterious about them. It's just all fancy wordplay, really. Not much wordplay, just misconceptions. Misunderstandings of what's going on. Spectres of the feast. Impotent spectres of the feast. The camera tracks two men down a canal sidewalk leading to a boutique with the sign A. Willets, Costumes and Vestments. Staker enters only to find Willets immediately on the defensive. "I'm not a flux officer," Ars Staker said. The flux, that's part of Nunnian City. Note the connotations of the word there. "I'm simply curious. I want to know why you stand there every night the way you do." "It's nothing to be ashamed of," Willets muttered, dropping his eyes. "I don't do anything." "That's just it, you don't do anything. Why do you and others like you stand there not doing anything? What are you thinking of? What do you see? What do you feel?" "I've got business to attend to," Willets protested. "I'm busy. Can't you see I'm busy?" "Willets," he said, "I've got to know." This is Ars speaking kid. "Willets," he said, "I've got to know. I've got to know. I've been digging into this capital of a city week after week, and you're the thing I found at the bottom of it. You're going to tell me what it feels like down there, or so help me, I'll break your neck." Not really very good reporting. But anyway, how can I tell? How can I tell you? Willets demanded with sudden, mouse-like fury. "I can't tell you. I can't. I haven't got the words. You have to be me or my kind before you'd understand." See, He hasn't got the words. Remember what we said about words earlier. What Staker would need to understand is empathy. Getting back to what it is that makes us human. What I was mentioning earlier. Diving deep into human nature. And so it ends. Staker's movie ends abruptly at this point, with him threatening violence to Willits. Staker pinning the little man to the counter. Note. He has not the words, yes. Now that hides a secret. Marx is not short of words with regard to that which Derrida characterizes as the secret. What secret? How can you write about it so fluently? Well, this is back to the story. Once the onlookers have finished watching Staker's movie, they decide the last scene had something, but it needs re-solidifying with proper actors, few broken teeth, maybe finish with the little guy getting knocked into the canal, and of course there would have to be a pair of young lovers in it. Always need young lovers in a movie. Could be a saga of the common man. Maybe call it Our Fair City, if that title isn't illegally sequestered. And so it begins. This is what it means to be a secret, the secret of the city. They made The Solid, one of Supernova's big budget productions for the year. It took it in credits on every inhabited planet of the Federation, and Rhapsody 182 was a powerful, respected man thereafter. They called it Song of a Mighty City. It had 3 electronic orchestras, 17 hit tunes, and a regiment of nude dancing girls. The solidization was gelled in the studios using the pastel shades deemed most appropriate, and they finally selected a more suitable city than Nunnian for backgrounds. Our Staker, of course, did not come into it at all. Fluctuate Nick Mercator. She is tossed by the waves, but does not sink. The motto of Paris. Obedentia civium urbis felicitas. The obedience of the citizens produces a happy city. Motto of Dublin. I mention these hoping that you will connect them with things that are occurring in Paris and Dublin at this present time. Once mighty cities. What is happening to them? I know that motto of Dublin because of my reading of Finnegan's Wake, which in the Wake is referred to as Heliopolis, a major city of ancient Egypt, city of the sun, Helios, the personified and deified form of the sun, identified by the Greeks with the native Egyptian god Ra and Atum, whose principal cult was located in the city. This is from Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan, a solid man. Now easy, good Finnemore, sir, and take your leisure, like a god on pension, and don't be walking abroad. Sure, you'd only lose yourself in Heliopolis. Now the way your roads in Capelavesta, or that winding there after the Calvary, the Northumbrian and the Faves Barrow, and Waddings Raid and the Barrow Moor, and wet your feet maybe with the foggy dews abroad, meeting some sick old bankrupt, or the Cotterick's donkey with his shoe hanging, clankata chankata, or a slut snoring with an impure infant on a bench. Secrets of the city, you see. 'Twould turn you against life. So 'twould. Secrets of the city. Now these are secrets. For Dublin, for Joyce, Dublin is a city of the imagination. I once said, Joyce, as we were walking down the University Strasse, to give a picture of Dublin so complete that if the city one day suddenly disappeared from the earth, it could be reconstructed out of my book. That's from Frank Budgeon's book on Joyce. So the secret of the city could be constructed out of Ulysses, but out of Finnegan's Wake, the secret heart of humanity can be reconstructed. Still trajectories. Something of an oxymoron, like the flux in Nunian City. I could have made something of that too, but this video is long enough. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.